Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us in another seminar, Caregiving seminar for Care for the Caregiver. It's wonderful to see many friends and colleagues and the newcomers joining us tonight. For those who don't know me, I'm Iman Maj. I'm a physician and also the director of the Osher Center. And this is my colleague, Chris Ma, and another colleague and friend, Dr. Emily Wong, who is going to join us shortly. The topic tonight is care about the caregiver, and specifically it's about the rethinking the cultural scripts and how do cultural scripts actually influence our caregiving. But before we start the presentation, first I wanted to thank our staff at the Osher Center. We have Carolyn and we have Rachel there. They have done an amazing job to make this event happen, so thank you so much. If it wasn't for their hard work, I wouldn't know that how would it pull it together, so thank you so much. A little bit about Osher Center before. Oh, hi, Em. Yeah, this is Dr. Em, and she's zooming in from Hong Kong. So,
hi.
A little bit before we start, I would like to talk a little bit about the Osher Center, that what it is, if you're new here and you're hearing the name for the first time. Osher Center, we are a center for integrative health at the Department of Family Medicine, and we came into existence in 2018 through an endowment from the Osher Foundation. And Osher is the name of the gentleman who lives in San Francisco. Mr. Osher is 97 years old, and that has been his mission to make investment or endowment in the academic centers to change the care delivery. He wanted to have a better model for care delivery into the system. There are 10 centers across the US and one in Karolinska in Sweden. And the reason that we have one in Sweden because Mr. Osher's wife is from Sweden. So collectively, there are 11 Osher centers internationally, so to speak. We have formed an administrative part, an administrative body for the 11 Osher centers. It's called Osher Collaborative. And this is what you see there, OC, Osher Collaborative. This is the administrative body for the Osher centers that coordinates the collaboration and organizes the coordination and work between the Osher centers. Each Osher center is very unique. We do not follow a prescriptive direction from the Osher Foundation. Like Osher Harvard, they're very strong in research. Vanderbilt, they're very strong in mindfulness. And it happens that at UW, because of me and my team, we are very strong in acupuncture and Chinese medicine. Then you have heard the term Ming, and tonight it is one of our seminars in Ming. Ming funds have been made possible through the generous gift of Dr. Emily Wong and her family. Mr. Ming was an industrialist and philanthropist in Hong Kong who had a passion for integrative medicine and especially in Chinese medicine. And through his generous fund from the family to actually honor his memory, Dr. Emily Wong and family started the Ming funds at the university, and we are very fortunate to use these funds for educational purposes. At the Osher Center, we have 3 different sections for our activities. We have clinical arm, we have educational arm, and we have research arm. Our educational arm is the one that we use a lot of the funds from the Ming Foundation. So thank you so much, Emily, for your generosity and the generosity of your family. And this is actually a new gift from Emily's family, from Sonlin and Priscilla Chow, that last year they gave us a gift, and this gift again is for East-West studies and bringing Chinese medicine and translating Chinese medicine into academic centers. Through these funds, we have been able to have different activities, educational part. Our education has 2 arms. One arm is public-facing, and one arm is for professionals. So the event that we have tonight is specifically designed for professionals, But it doesn't mean that public cannot attend. But the other arm that it's public facing, it's usually virtual, and we do 3 or 4 series in a year. Last year, our theme was brain health and nutrition. This year, the theme is care for the caregiver. And next year, that my dear friend and colleague, Dr. Bell, is going to lead, is going to be integrative medicine, women's health. So with that, we are going to introduce our esteemed speakers. This is my dear colleague and friend and my mentor, Dr. Emily Wong. She's zooming in from Hong Kong, as I mentioned. Emily is internal medicine specialist, and she has done fellowship in integrative medicine through Andrew Weil Program, University of Arizona. Currently, she lives in Hong Kong. She lives and practices actually in Hong Kong, and she has extensive interest in coaching and also integrative medicine. Then I have my esteemed colleague here, Chris Ma. She's a PhD in clinical psychology. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Yeah, I have a hard time reading it. Clinical psychology from UW. I'm not old. That's too far. No, I have to pick it up. No, sorry, I'm going to read it from here. So Chris's interest in research is focusing on improving caregiving system for culturally diverse backgrounds. She's assistant professor at UW. And I feel I'm very fortunate that I found Chris. Because when I was thinking about this topic, I was talking to Emily that, how can we bring somebody else? And so I know they're the right person. And then it's Chris, and I talked to Chris, and Chris, do you know Em? Oh, I know Em. We have already connected. So everything came together really, really nicely, people with expertise. So it was a blessing that we could find each other and put this presentation together. And that would be me, I guess. And I'm an associate professor. I'm a family medicine by training. I've done my fellowship in integrative medicine through University of Arizona. And I have the honor of serving as the director of the Osher Center at this point. Before we start our talk, I also want to take advantage of this moment and thank a very special guest that we have tonight. She's one of our patrons, and she has done a very generous gift to the Osher Center, and we are extremely thankful, Anna Shin, that you're here. And thank you so much for your gift, and this money will be well spent, and we will definitely make sure that we use it for educational and clinical work. So thank you so much, and thanks for making the time tonight. I know that you're very busy, but thanks for being with us. Now, caregiving, and what does it really mean? And the clash of the cultures. So last year, when I was thinking about what would be the topic for this year and what we want to discuss, I was actually thinking about my patients. These patients come to clinic, they get treatment, and they always have somebody with them. Majority of them, they have a caregiver. So when people come to clinic, you focus on the patient. The whole focus is on the patient. Everything is about the patient. But then I would watch the caregivers, that how they're present. They're always there. They take care of these patients. And it started crossing my mind, who is taking care of these individuals? I started talking to them that, okay, well, I appreciate that you're here. You're bringing this patient. They're getting the treatment. They're getting the acupuncture. We put the needles. Let's take you to the other room. Is there something that we can do for you? This patient with the needles, they cannot go anywhere for the next half an hour or 40 minutes. Do you like to rest here? Do you want a free acupuncture session? Can I put needles in your ear so you can relax? Some of them would say, yes, absolutely. Some of them say, no, that's okay. I can go do my shopping. And some others say, I just want to sit in the lobby and relax and read something. So I started thinking about the fact that as a caregiver, who is taking care of the caregiver? And that was the initiation of putting this series together. But what I didn't know is that in 2024, I would be the caregiver. Sorry, it's a bit emotional here. My mom got diagnosed with cancer in 2024, and gallbladder cancer, and they gave us 6 months to live, and it was March of this year. And it was completely unexpected. I never knew that I'm going to find myself. It was a visit. My mom was supposed to come and visit. She lives in Iran. She was supposed to come and visit for 6 weeks. And then within 6 weeks, she was losing weight. We started the whole process, and they said she has gallbladder cancer. She has 6 months to live, and there's nothing we can do. So one thing to another, we found a surgeon. They took the gallbladder out. We did chemo. But we go through the motions. But I never thought that I will be in this position, that I will be the caregiver. I didn't plan for it. It was unexpectedly happening. What was very interesting that made me think about that how things happen is that I'm originally from Iran. I did my medical training in Iran. In Iran, the only way that, one of the ways actually, you know that you're dying is when people are very nice to you. Everybody becomes nice to you. So everybody knows that you have an incurable disease except the patient. Then they guess, oh, okay, there is something wrong with me. Everybody's nice to me. And this is what happened with my mom. So now I have that cultural aspect of me being from Iran that I have to respect. And it's perfectly acceptable in our culture that you don't share the information with the patient. The family has to know, but not the patient, to psycho-emotionally protect this individual. And then from the other part, I'm stuck. I'm a physician here. I'm a physician in the UW system in the United States, and the culture is opposite. The first person that you go to is the patient. You tell the patient. So that was this dilemma, that how do I make it work? Am I the son? Am I the doctor? Am I the caregiver? What is my role here? And it happened that in one day, my mom in the kitchen said, I have a question for you. And she looked at me and says, do I have cancer? Just like that. And I froze. For a moment, I froze. I didn't know what to say. And said, well, that is a wonderful question for your doctor. I'm not your treating physician, so we are going to see the oncologist today, and you can ask the question. And she did. And it happened that the physician, he's Iranian, so he tried to kind of make it work, being respectful of the culture, but at the same time saying that, you know what? No, we have to mention it. So we kind of made peace, bringing these two cultures together, but it was very difficult. It was really, really challenging. And I'm sure I'm not the only person who has gone through it. There are many, many others who go through this movement, this motion, and this process. And even though we say we are in US, there are different cultures. The Southern culture, Northern culture, East, West, depending which background people are coming from, it's very different. So I thought that I would share this with you to kind of like now we have a little bit of understanding that where we want to go with the rest of this presentation. As part of this presentation, we have some exercises for you, and that's what the piece of paper and the pencil is there. And then Chris is going to present 3 cases for us, 3 scenarios. And at the very end, we have another reflection exercise. So that would be the flow of the presentation for tonight. And with that, I think that the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you. Yeah, so when we first think about like caregiving, one of the questions I also tend to ask myself is that when we talk about caregiving, do we just want to focus this talk to people who are currently doing the caregiving, or like people who are receiving care, or also all the other ones who are currently not caring for others? And then so one of the quotes that comes to my mind here is a quote from Rosalind Carter. It's a very well-known quote in the caregiving or caregiver community. So the quote says, there are only 4 kinds of people in the world: those who have been caregivers, those who are caregivers, those who will be caregivers, and those who need them. So what is so powerful about this quote is basically talking about the essence of caregiving, which is caregiving is an experience of being human. It is gonna happen in our lives, whether we're caring for somebody or we're being cared for. And so that also explains the importance why we need to talk about caregiving and also how we talk about caregiving, this topic. And the other part about caregiving is also when we talk about it as an experience of being human, it showcased that on one hand, each of us have our own needs and vulnerabilities. And on the other hand, there's also a piece of the interconnectedness that we value as a community to support one another. And that's what it means by like being an experience of being human. So, and I find this like kind of how, in a way, like beautifully and also at the same time kind of hard to grasp when it comes to like thinking about and understanding the experience of caregiving, because each of us experience this in different ways, but also at the same time, we are all interconnected with some sort of experience going through caring for someone in our lives. So we want to kind of, use this quote to set the stage, and also as we, go through the reflection and all the other thoughts that we have, just thinking about like, okay, what does caregiving mean to me? And also what does caregiving mean to us as a community as a whole? Okay, Em?
Dr. M, yeah.
Yes. I thank you so much for this opportunity. I wanted to just highlight and maybe expand a little bit on what Chris has said. I think that many times in my experience, the actual culture of medicine, it's its own culture, right? And we have certain expectations for ourselves as doctors, as nurses, as clinicians of any kind. And I think that the sort of prevailing value is to put the patient's needs first. And it's almost like, we don't get to have needs. And in fact, David Kopash has written beautifully on this. He was a speaker, I think, at a prior Osher talk, and has written a book called Rehumanizing Medicine. And what he's trying to say in that book is basically the process of educating our sort of next generation of care providers. Often the process of educating in med school, going through residency, fellowship training, and so forth, it actually is a dehumanizing experience. And we learn that we are supposed to be these sort of automatons, right? These robots, and we don't have needs, and we don't have to go to the bathroom, we don't have to have meals, and we don't have to sleep. And so I think that there's almost like this concept that, you are like someone who just meets these needs. You don't have a body, you don't have any needs. And I want to say that even though there's a certain altruism to that kind of way of thinking in that culture, there's also an arrogance to it, right? There's also an arrogance to sort of like, well, I'm not human. I don't have these needs, right? And I just want to encourage us as we move through the presentation today, just to take a step back and recognize that there are these conflicting cultural kind of narratives going on in our heads, whether it's familial narrative, cultural narrative from the culture where your family of origin is. It's a cultural narrative in the workplace, and there's often conflicting narratives going on. And it's helpful just to recognize that we as individuals are human, have needs. Not only are we allowed to have needs, we actually are best served when we can actually acknowledge our needs. And that helps us actually be more human as care providers, whether we're clinicians or whether we're family care providers.
So as we think about like the cultural narratives that we have in society around caregiving, the reason why we need to talk about these cultural narratives is that how we talk about and how we think about caregiving influence how we set the expectations and roles on caregivers. And sometimes some of those narratives are so in a way that like we either been like inherited that we didn't even think about or even question, or like some of those narratives are like being passed down to us, and it was like, oh yeah, that's what it is, so then we just keep doing it. But we really seldom really think about and register, okay, why am I having some of these expectations on myself as a caregiver, whether as a healthcare provider or as a caregiver in our own personal life? And also how are some of these expectations work together and how some of these expectations do not work together. And also how are some of these expectations work for us and also at the same time work for the people we care for, but sometimes that's not the case. So I think when we think about and talk about cultural narratives, we also need to understand, where do these narratives come from? It can be coming from our society. So for example, how our society look at different types of care, how they value different types of care differently. It can also come from institution, our institution in a way kind of determines how we should work as a healthcare provider, or what are some of the things that we are incentivized to do, what are some of the things we're not. And then it can also come from our own cultural backgrounds, as we mentioned, some of the cultural practices, cultural norms, and then family, of course, the family dynamics, or also some of the things, or our own upbringing within the family, which kind of teaches what is right or wrong in terms of caregiving, and also individually, our own expectations for ourselves. What are some of the expectations we are giving to ourselves? And whether some of those are healthy, are still adaptive to us, or some of those are actually doing more harm than good. So as we talk about narratives, these narratives, identifying what are some of those narratives, how do they influence our expectations, understand where do they come from, and also reflect on how are those expectations that we are carrying for ourselves, what are the effects that they have on us. And I think that's where we're trying to work together on during this hour, during this presentation. So one of the things that I really like in terms of another quote here is that they're saying that narratives are like the water in which we all swim. They are deeply embedded ideas and assumptions that we don't register anymore, but they somehow become part of our collective cultural fabric of unspoken values. And especially when sometimes we have discussions with our family members around care for one family member, or when we have discussions with our patients, each of us, we have our own unspoken and sometimes implicit expectations about what caregiving looks like. And this may not be the same for our patients. It might not be the same for another provider. This may not be the same for another family member. But somehow, when we talk about caregiving, we don't usually bring up those implicit or unspoken expectations and values. So some examples of common narratives and myths about caregiving, which I don't know if some of those resonate with you. So for example, I should be the one to handle this because I'm a healthcare professional. I should have known better. It's wrong to feel angry, frustrated, or resentful. I should sacrifice career for my family. I cannot put my parents in a care facility. So these are just some examples of the common narratives that we have kind of heard of in the society. And then the question we're asking is that how do these narratives and expectations help or hinder us to thrive as individuals and to become better caregivers?
Great, thank you. Yes, it's always the shoulds. It should be like this, it should be like this, and what does it really mean? Should it or could it? So that's the difference. So for the reflection here, I would like to, everybody kind of, please pick up that piece of paper and the pen. These are the two questions. We can give you 1 minute. Just write something down. It's what is expected of you in your roles as a healthcare practitioner and as a caregiver in personal life? And the second part is that how are these expectations influencing your well-being? The next slide would be, when was the last time you said no to something that's expected of you and you went to take care of yourself? And how did you feel about it? it's difficult to write it down, isn't it? So when you read the questions, oh, I know that, but when you start thinking about it, how did I feel about it actually? Did I feel good? Did I feel bad? Was it expected to me to say no or not saying no? So the reason we put these questions here, just to reflect, there is no right or wrong answer here. You just want to make sure that we bring that awareness that their desires, their needs, that maybe they're unmet. There's this sense of guilt. There's this sense of duty, that should not be there actually. So with this, we are handing it back to Chris, and we have 3 scenarios that we can move through them.
Okay, great. Before we dive into a scenario, are there anyone have questions about the reflection exercise just now? No? Still need some time to think about your answers? Okay, so we're going to talk about 3 different scenarios. And in the spirit of transparency, let's just say this way, these 3 scenarios are all about kind of caring for aging parents. There might be some sort of bias for us when we're creating these scenarios. I can say the 3 of us have quite some fun tweaking them, and may also have some sort of like lifted experience putting into it. But we do acknowledge that caregiving appears in all forms. So it's not just about caring for aging parents. It can also be caring for loved ones, spouses, kids, friends. So I think generally most of the principles and things that we talk about here will be applied, but also with some sort of adaptations depending on the situations. But yeah, so I think we're going to go through, hopefully we have time to go through 3 scenarios. Each one of them represent a different aspect and also challenge in caregiving that we tend to see that is common among caregivers. So the first scenario is about getting outside help. So I'm going to read the scenario. We can all read the scenario together, and then there will be some questions to think about, and then we would love to hear some answers if you have any to share. And then we can also kind of summarize what are some of the things we can learn from each scenario. Okay, so scenario 1 is about getting outside help. So Dr. Annie is a dedicated physician and a mother of 2 who is struggling to balance her work and family with the care of her aging parents. Her 90-year-old dad, John, takes care of her mom, Betty, who has been experiencing memory loss and mobility issues. Anne often drops by her parents' house after long shifts at the hospital. She has noticed that her parents don't eat proper meals unless she does the cooking. And John tells her that Betty hasn't had a shower in weeks. Anne's teenager has also begun having some trouble at school, and she's due to meet with the teacher next week. So Anne has broached this idea of hiring a home health aide for her parents, but her parents are strongly opposed to the idea. They don't like the idea of having a stranger coming into their home. They believe that they are doing fine on their own. They expect Anne to be the one taking care of them because Anne is their only daughter and also a doctor. I don't know how resonating this is, but for some of us, it's probably something that we're going through. So, some of the questions to think about. What is expected of Dr. Anne Lee in this situation by her parents and by herself? How do these expectations work or not work for Dr. Anne and her parents? How would Dr. Anne feel in this situation? And if you were her, what would you do? Just give a minute or 2 that we think about, and we can discuss here together, too.
Are you inviting people to give you feedback? Or?
Do you want to say names? Any thoughts? Any volunteers? Any brave volunteers?
Eugene, please.
Yeah, I mean, I think that this is not only common for what we see as physicians, right, and what the family members are struggling with as a cardiologist. I mean, this is a very common situation. If I look at it from my Asian lens, then I think as you're talking about the cultural sensitivities and understanding that, if this was an Asian woman coming in as a physician, I would completely relate to what she's struggling with because of the expectations, as a son or daughter, in my case of Asian immigrants, like you feel this, I would say, struggle to try to balance the expectations culturally of your family, especially as the oldest son in my case, that I feel that I would be responsible to do all of these things. My parents are getting to that age. My dad is having memory issues right now, so I can relate to this, and he lives in Korea. So very hard. I think my parents would be feeling the exact same way. They would not want to go into a home or have somebody come to the house. So it would be a long struggle for there to be acceptance of any kind of assistance. My mom does it all for my dad, and I think I know it's very difficult for her. So I think this is, and it's not just an Asian thing. I think all the patients, regardless of racial or ethnic backgrounds, face very similar challenges, especially when you're a working mother and have a child in high school or whatever, high school. That's hard. So I totally resonate with that from a caregiver perspective and also as a clinician.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, so you kind of touch upon a couple of things here, right? One is that from a cultural perspective, how different cultures look at sending parents to a facility or not being the person directly giving care to loved ones, to parents. What does the culture say about that? And also sometimes we're also afraid of how other people see us. Are we not being obedient? Not in Asian American culture, at least it's there's the word filial piety, that we're not obedient, we're not respecting our parents. And then there's also the piece of the expectations on ourselves, right? In this case, for Dr. Andy, she is struggling between okay, I want my parents to get the most help. And at the same time, I cannot do this in the long run. And there are also the possibility of maybe feeling disappointed in herself that I cannot actually do this, even though I love my parents, but I cannot do this. And how to kind of overcome or cope with that disappointment while also questioning whether that disappointment is really something that helps with the situation, also help with herself, her well-being. And also, what does that feeling of disappointment tell? Is that something about the narrative saying that you being the daughter and being a healthcare professional should be able to handle all of this because you're trained to do this? So, and also, I don't know, for some other healthcare providers I talk to, they will also say something like, I can do this for my patients. Why can't I not do this for my own family? Right? I can be on call for hours, but why can't I be on 24/7 for my parents? Now, there's also two different struggles, I realize that. But I think these are some of the things that we wanted to kind of reveal and put it out here, for people to really think about, some of the what we call implicit, expectations and narratives that are kind of working in our minds. And also, for a lot of people I talk to, when it comes to the topic of getting outside help, it's kind of a constant struggle. If you have lived the experience of caregiving someone, at some point you will get to this barrier or this obstacle. And it is not going to be a one-time thing. Rarely there will be a one-time solution where okay, we're good. This is a one-time decision. Yeah, no, it's usually multiple times revisiting, negotiating, back and forth. Yeah, all sorts of ways that I've heard people doing. So this is what this scenario is trying to bring out, is that not being able to do alone, wanting to get help from outside, and then also trying to meet the expectations of the parents. it's difficult. And it's also something that sometimes we can make peace with it. Sometimes we may not always be able to make peace with the decision. Dr. M and Iman, anything to add?
No, I think
Yeah.
that's well said. Em, please go ahead.
I was going to say that I feel like something that I've experienced myself is just this concept. You mentioned the filial piety, right, and the obedience, and I feel like there's this point at which we, as the children, actually end up kind of parenting our parents, right? It's like our parents have these certain set ideas, and we know they're. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I think our parents sort of have these ideas of like, how the world should be. And we know for the most part, like they may or may not be relevant to our modern lives. And it's almost like, as you say, there may be a series of episodes where there's a crisis, someone goes to the hospital, someone has a fall, whatever it is, where they increasingly recognize that they don't have the kind of ability to take care of themselves. But it's usually a very gradual process, and it's not something that they're readily accept, just as we would not readily accept it for ourselves if it were happening to us. So I just want to point out that, at some point that role shift of where you're the obedient, kind of kid, and then you actually have to step into this role where you're a parent to your parents, that's going to happen, and it's probably already happening for most of us. And it's our choice how we want to be as parents. And we don't have to parent in the same way that we were parented, right? And in many ways, as care providers, it's almost like we're in a better place to have access to resources, to know what the resources are, and also educate our whole family, including our parents, about, what basically good care looks like, and how really we can provide respect, dignity, allow them to stay in their homes and age in their homes when we have access to these kinds of resources.
Okay, so let's move to the next second scenario. Oh, but these are just some of the pointers we briefly mentioned. We kind of touched base on some of those things already, but like for scenario one, we talk about how to acknowledge and validate the feelings of the parents, but also at the same time acknowledge our own. In this case, Dr. Annie's feelings and also the needs that she has, and also some tips. And of course, this varies whether how it works. But when we broach this idea to aging parents, in this case, kind of the idea of getting outside help, presenting some of the benefits, but also listening to the concerns that they have. And in some ways, we might need to do it in incremental ways of maybe doing a trial period, involving the parents to make the decisions of choosing the home health aide, setting some criteria or knowing some sort of priorities of the parents when they want, in terms of looking for a home health aide, what do they want, some things like that, so that we can do this in hopefully a collaborative way and also but in the incremental steps. Because like Dr. M mentioned, this is gonna be a gradual process for actually both parties, not just the parents. And then at last, it's always kind of have this mindset of balancing the family care, because Dr. Annie needs to kind of reassure that the parents, even though they're getting home health aid, Dr. Annie is gonna still be there for the parents, and also they will still have the family time together, and in fact, they might have more quality time together because Dr. Annie is not that burnt out when, compared to when she was being the only caregiver. So these are some of the suggested or thoughts that we have about this scenario. Okay, I think we have time to do one more scenario.
Sure, yes, we can do scenario two.
Yeah, okay. This second one is a fun one. So Oncologist Dr. Thomas Smith received news from his sister Audrey about their mom Linda's newly diagnosed advanced pancreatic cancer. The prognosis is poor. Audrey tells him that she and their dad both feel strongly that the diagnosis should not be shared with Linda. Linda has always been a strong-willed woman and remains fiercely independent in her late 70s. She hates the idea of being a burden, quote unquote, to her family. As a physician, Tom believes in the importance of full disclosure and believes it's unethical to hide the truth from patients. At the same time, as a son, he is also deeply protective of his mother. Linda is superstitious and never talks about illness or death. Her own sister recently died after a prolonged bout of cancer, and Tom worries that she may give up hope and refuse treatment if she understood the extent of her illness. So yes, the scenario is about disclosing the diagnosis, and here. The questions here is, what do Dr. Tom's sister and dad expect from Dr. Tom? What expectations does he have of himself as a doctor and as a son? If you were him, what would you do? We have quite a bit of healthcare providers here. Yes?
I just want to reflect on what you had said, which was that's a great question. We should ask your doctor, right? So understanding for yourself or for Dr. Tom, what role is he playing in that particular scenario? And it probably varies depending on the dynamics, but
Yes.
your response was great. That's a great question
Yeah,
for
thank
your
you.
doctor.
Thank you. Yes. I think a lot of us can connect with this, correct? Like we have family members and what is my role? Where do I fit? I want to be the son. I want to be caring and loving. Stop asking me these difficult questions. But at the same time, I want to be part of the solution for you. I want to try everything possible to maybe change the diagnosis, change the outcome. And inherently, it puts me on the other side. So everything gets kind of in the gray area. And I will be challenged as an individual that what is my role? I have psycho-emotional challenges. And then the family gets all confused that you're a doctor, so why don't you want to be a doctor? This is what you're trained for. So it is interesting in a sense of making us think that what would be the best way of moving things forward.
Yeah. And also the other aspect that when we're talking about the scenario is about the emotional aspect about death. So, Dr. M, do you want to talk a little bit about why you picked this picture and the quote?
Yes. So for those of you who haven't seen this movie, this is really a great movie. I highly recommend it. So Awkwafina is the star. And basically, that's her grandmother with the white hair on the right. And she... her grandmother has cancer, and the whole rest of the family is like, don't tell her the diagnosis. And Awkwafina's a granddaughter, and she's like, what the heck? Why are we keeping this news from her? She deserves to know the truth. And so she goes back and visits her grandmother in Taiwan and, basically, I guess, tries to understand why it is that everyone around her is thinking like we should not tell grandma anything. And she herself is like, this is so wrong. And one of the quotes from one of her relatives is, it's not the cancer that kills the person, it's the fear. It's the fear of the cancer. So I think it's that concern that they won't be able to handle the emotional impact of the diagnosis because maybe they, have this belief that if you have cancer, it's a death sentence.
Yeah, so there's also the emotional piece about like how do we look at death or look at some outcome that we want to have some control. We try hard to provide care, but also at the same time knowing that we actually don't have that much control over the outcome. Yeah. So some of the thoughts we have here is that I think one thing that we need to kind of think about is what Dr. Tom, his dad, and also his sister may be experiencing at that moment is grief, anger, sadness, maybe shock as well because of this diagnosis. They can actually, because they have these shared feelings, they can actually support one another and also allow Dr. Tom, because Dr. Tom is the person who has a dual role in this case as a healthcare provider. So allow Dr. Tom to also express his unique conflict in this case, in this role, as a doctor and also as a son. Understanding the different options and also like weighing the benefits and risks. So it is important, like the family, to get a full picture of like the potential treatment options, and also to help Linda's doctors understand that they have concerns about Linda's potential emotional breakdown, and if she is given a diagnosis without a clear plan, which is something that we do not want to do. And then like the other part is like having a conversation with their mom, Linda, in this case, may be helpful to ascertain if she trusts them to take care of her, or if she prefers to know the diagnosis herself or not. And in your case, that's actually your mom, proactively asked about this, and then also kind of knowing how to, meaning that she is ready to hear about this, and it's best to hear it from the doctor. And then like palliative care consultation can also be sought out. In this case, to help like facilitate a big picture conversation that actually focus on the patient's goals and preferences. And again, always balancing the needs. It's hard, but that's our goal. Our deal is to balancing different people's needs in this case. So whether or not Linda knows her diagnosis, the family needs to determine the treatment plan and also the care approach with the goal of ensuring that Linda's wishes are respected. And also that she is allowed to maintain the maximum autonomy and dignity. Okay, so we might not have time to go through the third one. That's okay. So I think some of the key takeaways we have here, just kind of like a very brief, 2 scenario exercise and also some reflection, is that what we're trying to do here is that we want to try to talk about like caregiving is part of the humanity that reflects who we are as individuals and as human beings, that we're interconnected with one another. Our experience and expectations of caregiving are socially and culturally constructed by unspoken narratives and also assumptions. So to balance our dual roles as healthcare providers and as caregivers, we need to first recognize what is expected of us in these roles, examine how these expectations mean to us and whether they help us thrive as an individual and be a better caregiver for others, and also how we ourselves define our own expectations and narratives in these roles. For example, like what is important to us in these roles? What can I do or not do? What does so-called success in these roles mean to us or look like to us? So these are some of the questions that do not have right or wrong fixed answers. It's really dependent on the individual, but we ourselves have the agency to kind of determine and have these answers and have clarity around these expectations that we put on for ourselves. So we're gonna leave the final 2 reflection questions for you all to think about. One question is, how would you want to show up in your role as a healthcare provider and a caregiver? And what is one thing that you can do to get closer to your desired roles? These are the 2 questions that we leave for you all. And then finally, these are just some resources that we want to share with you all. The Caring Across Generations, that website, so this is a kind of nonprofit organization that's particular target at how can we change and improve the narratives around caregiving in order to promote social change and also policy change. And then on the right-hand side, Dr. Kristen Neff is one of the very well-established researcher and also clinician on self-compassion. And she has her own YouTube channel and also has with a lot of self-compassion exercise, particularly for caregivers. And Dr. M, would you want to share your experience reading the book Elderhood?
Yeah, so this is an amazing book. Louise Aronson, Dr. Louise Aronson is a geriatrician at UCSF. And this book is really, I think, her manifesto about how we really don't, I think, pay enough attention to the aging and elderly in the healthcare system, and to understand that the needs of the aging and elderly are often very different than the rest of medicine. In other words, in the rest of medicine, we're very focused on kind of curing and treating. And her point is that in geriatrics, at a certain stage of life, not only is there curing and treating, but there's also caring and taking care of the patient themselves, their family, their caregivers, looking at kind of the broader ecosystem, the village, so to speak, that they live in, whether or not it's truly a village or not, and trying to figure out how it is that we as clinicians can contribute to the quality of life for them, and recognizing that, there's so many different, everyone has a different situation, and so we can't make assumptions. So, great book. Highly recommend.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you. So I think by reviewing these scenarios and having a little bit of discussion, we kind of came up to a conclusion that it's a really complex situation, being a caregiver and having a dual role. But maybe there are some ways that can help us to navigate that, get a little bit of clarity in the family dynamic and our role as providers outside, and how we can get help and how we can actually clear our mind. And I do understand that sometimes it's very difficult for the family to hear it, but maybe in the long term it's beneficial for the family. Now, as part of this conversation and discussion of being caregiver, it's always the concern that I am not doing right, I am not doing enough, and I am feeling guilty. So this is the topic of our next presentation, and our great speaker is right there. Feeling guilty. It's going to be in November. It's virtual. The date and time is there, so you're more than welcome to register and benefit from discussion and Q&A. I just wanted to make a pitch for the next topic that we have. And with that, I think we're going to open it for questions for about 5 minutes. If there are any comments, questions, please.
Where can I find the movie? Where can we find the movie The Farewell?
Oh, I believe it might be available. I don't actually know. Is it available on Netflix or Amazon Prime? I actually don't know. Yeah, probably have to, search for it. It's actually quite available. It was, I think it was featured, in some award ceremony. I can't remember which one.
Yes, hi. Thank you all. What a wonderful conversation. I'm Paul James. I'm a family doctor. I'm afraid when I say this, some of you might come to my office and bring your parents. But I want to highlight the role of then a third-party caring practitioner. And I'm speaking through the lens of a family doctor and family medicine is a little strange because at times we think that the patient is the family and not the individual. And so then I can't tell you how many times in my career I've had children bring their parents in or I'm asked to make a house call on mom and dad and do a home assessment. And part of the conversation that occurs before I see the adult parents are, how are you doing as a caregiver? And this is where my authority as the doctor to speak the truth, maybe not necessarily about a diagnosis, but about the caring that needs to occur and how, For example, I might need to have a conversation with parents about how their daughter is not being a good daughter if they do what the parent says. And do you want your daughter to be a bad daughter? And we have these conversations which are a direct, the goal would be to do this within the context of the cultural environment and to have that conversation and be informed by that. And I guess my one caution regarding this whole conversation about being the caregiver and the healthcare practitioner is that, could I just suggest that I think our goal would be to never be both?
Yes. That would be optimal, yes.
That when we go down that path, we are trapping ourselves. Yeah. And so then talking to your healthcare practitioner to help get you out of that role. Because again, I can make that clear statement to someone to say, wow, that would be a very bad doctor if they took care of you. So I just thought I would add that to the pool of meaning here.
Thank you, Paul. Yes. Any other thoughts?
While it's not easy, one thing that we can do today is have those conversations before we find ourselves in the problem. So, and it's not easy to have the conversations today, but it's easier to have the conversations today than it is in 10 years when mom's not remembering things.
Yes, thank you. That's a great point, yes. Yes, and sometimes there's an element, again, at least in our cultures, you shy away from because you think that it's never going to happen. They're going to live a healthy, long life, and you will never have these conversations. And sometimes you bring it up, say, what, you mean that I'm going to die? You want me to die? Or you bring, so, I don't know, sometimes a no win, but it's better to have the conversation. It's better, I personally have experienced it, and this is something I learned here. I owe it to Western American culture, that be direct and honest, and it has helped me actually to have these conversations ahead of time very directly and clearly. So thank you for that point. Great.
One more thing. The other thought that, and I think the three of us have discussed this too, is like it's not just about these two roles per se, right? Because each individual is multidimensional. Our identity are multidimensional. There are different parts of it. We shouldn't trap ourselves into just these two roles because that would be pretty unhealthy. So I think the question is, how can we still, and this is something that we both, the three of us have talked about, how do we maintain, not lose ourselves, maintain our sense of identity in multiple dimensions while we still at some point have these two roles as part of our identity, but not the whole thing. And that's what we mean by the holistic, right? Health, holistic well-being is like to make sure we have all these dimensions and different aspects of our identity in place and ideally in harmony with one another.
Great, thank you. Dr. M, any last word from you?
I just really appreciate the discussion. I especially liked what Dr. James had to say about how, as the clinician, you actually, when you're not actually in the family, but as the sort of clinician in a scenario where you're dealing with the patient and their family, that's such a powerful role, right? You have this authority. Often it's a cultural expectation that the doctor knows best. And so it's often tremendously helpful to the family if you can assert that authority by, helping them mediate some of these conversations in a way that's healthy for, the overall family. So thank you for sharing that.
Thank you. Now, before we wrap up, I wanted to bring everybody's attention to one thing I forgot to mention. We're going to repeat the slides from the beginning. So that's this part. Dr. M is actually, where is it? So she has a blog, Integrity Healing blog, And I would like to encourage you guys to actually go here and read her blog. It is wonderful. It is wonderful. She talks from her heart. She writes from her heart. And it really syncs well with the areas that we are all interested in talking about. So, thank you so much for putting time into it and having this blog. And with that, thank you, Chris. And thank you, everybody, for being with us tonight. And I hope that it was a little bit of stimulating, making us think, and hopefully to some point be a little bit clarifying that we can get help and there are other people we can talk to, and hopefully understanding we are not alone in this path. It happens to all of us, and we don't necessarily have a relative by blood, but we do have a village that we can rely on and get help from each other. And with that, thank you so much for being here. Until next time, thank you.